Hi, everyone. Welcome wherever you are watching from, and welcome to C4D and CSR Live. We do have an awesome event lined up for you today, a wonderful initiative, in fact. And so, for even those of you who are joining and you may not be aware of what C4D or CSR is about, this is what this event about is to provide clarity on that, to kind of remind persons who may have been familiar with the concepts as well as to introduce the concepts to other persons who may not have been familiar. So, why did we decide to do this event? Because we recognize that communication is, in fact, a powerful agent, but not just for us to interact with each others, but also to help us to uplift society and to really foster long term changes and development. It is not just about imparting knowledge and looking at society's values and attitudes, but it is also about the many different ways that we can use communication tools and such to impart significant changes, to bring about behavior changes, to look at how we can improve the well being of our society, and so much more. And so, the C4D and CSR live event is a virtual conversation on communication for development, or development communications as it's called, and its variants such as social impact communications and how it can be applied into different spaces, including the corporate space. We also want to specifically highlight today how this can be applied to corporate social responsibility. And so this event has twofold, I'd like to say two main objectives. It's looking at how we companies and organizations, within the NGO sector, within the philanthropic sector, within the corporate sector, and even some development organizations can apply development communications to improve the impact and sustainability of their corporate social responsibility initiatives. And two, we also want to use C4D and CSR Live to highlight opportunities for students who are currently studying communications or its different variants, or even people who are doing marketing or just development or any form of social work, and they want to know how they can apply what they're learning in the academic context into the real work space. So we do have quite an audience here lined up with us, a panel rather. We do have some lovely panelists lined up with us here. And we see people are streaming in. And while you do so, we will just give persons a chance to join. And so at this point, you can just listen to just a little bit of background music as we go along, and then we will dive right in. So remember, we're just starting, and if you are watching, it's not too late to share the link with your friends, your colleagues, your loved ones, anyone who has a vested interest in communications, anyone who is intrigued about what communications for development is, anyone who even wants to know what CSR is or why both of them are being brought together within this webinar. So share this link. We are streaming live on Facebook, we are on YouTube, and we are also on LinkedIn. As we go along as well, we welcome your comments and we welcome your feedback. Hi, Chanel. Thank you for tuning in via LinkedIn. And we ask you as you go along to just get your questions in, and we look forward to having a truly wonderful evening. And while we wait, I won't give you quite a long time to wait though, because one of the things is that, I want us to get a little bit more intimate and to sort of understand who the key persons here are today. I mean, in our communication efforts, in our different promotional efforts, etc., we would have highlighted that persons here are from several different organizations across the world. So we're privileged to have with us these different persons who are coming from different organizations, from different contexts, etc. and all of this. And so, hi Nadine, thank you so much for joining us. And so, we want you to just, kind of get a little bit more background in terms of the different persons that are here. And so, I will go into some quick bio references. And I will start off with Lisa Ritchie. And Lisa joins us from Engaging Dev in Australia. So Lisa is a communication specialist who has worked in the humanitarian assistance and international development fields for 20 years. She has also worked for a number of resource sector clients in Australia and Papua New Guinea, assisting with the design of corporate social responsibility activities and associated communications and engagement strategies. There are many overlaps in communication strategies and approaches applied in the development sector, and those used in CSR led activities, including the importance of communicating change and using communications to influence change. So, Lisa, I will spotlight you just a bit so that persons can see and give Lisa a wave.
Hi everyone, it's great to be here.
All right, thank you so much for that, Lisa. And then we will move over now to Meera, and Meera joins us here from India. So Miss Meera Tendura is a founder and CEO of Aharon Communications. She's a veteran strategist for more than 2 decades. Her clients have benefited from her expertise, resulting in growth, evolution, and success. She has a mix of studies in microbiology, environmental studies, business management, sociology, etc. And she integrates all of these to address human decision making, offering a cross disciplinary method for integrated analysis, evaluation, and explanation. She's a strategic thinker and has included long term and short term projects for several global companies, Indian corporates, NGOs, and government agencies, politicians, professional associations, as well as public and private universities and colleges. And so we will also bring Meera into the spotlight and ask everyone to give her a wave. Okay, thank you, Meera. All right, and we'll jump over to Ed. When we asked Ed for his bio, he was like, oh, shucks, I'm just going to literally send you a few words, and then you can tell me if this suffices. So, Ed, after working for 7 years, Ed Fletcher, he's the co-managing director for Shape History. And I'll tell you this, I came across Shape History across various social media channels, and a member of my team, Infinity, was particularly intrigued by the work that Shape History does. So they were like, oh, we need to connect with this organization. So even before we decided to do this event, we sort of knew about the work that Shape History does. And so we had wanted to make that connection. And so we're honored to have Ed here with us. And Ed has 7 years in international development. And he now co-leads the incredibly talented team at one of what he says is the most exciting agencies in the world, Shape History. And so through collaborations with public, private, and third sectors across the globe, the Shape History team harnesses the power of communications and creative storytelling to make the world a fairer place faster. So again, we bring Ed into the spotlight and give Ed a wave.
Hi everybody, really excited to be here.
Hey, thank you, Ed. See, persons are joining. Hi, Glaze, and thank you so much for joining through LinkedIn as well. All right, and we continue to introduce our panelists, and I will jump over to Indy McClymont Lafayette. So Indy is a media and development communication specialist based in the Caribbean. She's a multi-award winning journalist and communication specialist with just over 20 years of experience within the space. She has quite a bit of experience through Panos Caribbean, where she worked for a number of years and did communications for development with significant focus on environmental issues such as climate change, HIV/AIDS, child rights, and gender. She has won several awards for many of the projects that she has done, including the Voices for Climate Change Education Project, which was named a UN Communications Best Practice Case Study. She has also worked with several development communication projects across the Caribbean and internationally, including an 8-island environmental conservation project implemented across 3 languages, that's English, French, and Spanish, after which she started Change Communications, where much of her work involves the use of participatory communication approaches. So, this is just a little bit about the work that Indy does. And as we go along, we will learn so much more about her. So we will now bring Indy to the spotlight and give her a wave.
Good evening, everybody.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Damien. Welcome as well, joining from LinkedIn. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. I would have introduced to you all our panelists for this evening. And I forgot to mention my name incidentally, but I'm Shanoy Coombs, and I like to call myself the Chief Change Champion for Infinity Integrated Communications, also based here in the Caribbean region. And we are a development focused communications company. We do lots of work with several international organizations, several NGOs, and even corporates that are looking to level up and to expand how they apply their corporate social responsibility initiatives. Uh, Pretty much in terms of a little bit of background, I've studied communications and then, so I did behavior change focus, and then I shifted over to a master's in intercultural communications and international development. And so I've been to the work that we do here at Infinity in terms of really using communications for good. In very simple terms, I always say that's literally what we do. We use communications for good. Hi, Lisa. Thank you so much for joining us as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, as I mentioned before, thank you so much again. And as I would have given you all of the different speakers who are here today and their backgrounds and where they're coming from. And before we go any further, hi, Christine. Thank you so much for joining us, also from LinkedIn. And before we go any further, we just want to give a big up. In Jamaica, we call this a big up. It means that you're welcoming and you're engaging with the different persons here. So we want to give a big up to all of the panelists here who have taken time out of their very busy schedules and also with the significant time zone differences to be here today. And so we will now give a shout out to our partners with this video. All right. Okay, thank you so much for that. So, without much further ado, I want us to jump right into the reasons that we are here. I mean, several of you would have tuned in as well because you may also have your questions. If you're just joining, just want to remind everyone that as we go along, you're free to drop your questions in our comment section and we will try as best as possible to answer as many of them as we go along. But I will just kick things off, with our panelists here. And so, I have given a bit of an overview about who you are, but I wanted to just jump right in and to get a little bit in terms of, tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got here, as well as your organization and the scope of work that you do. Very broad, but I know we can keep it concise. A little bit more about yourself that I may not have mentioned in my bio, a little bit about your organization, and also a little about the type of work that you do. So I'm going to just kick things off by going to Mira. Mira, you are on mute.
Right. So we've been doing corporate communication since many years, and in India, over a long period of time, CSR has kind of become mandatory. And so we moved from the perspective that CSR is something corporates have to do to a realization that if you're going to do it, then do it well. And then the next realization by the corporates that the doing it well is only going to happen when they do stakeholder engagement and they do understand issues, etc. And the realization that all that is only possible if you communicate, you understand communications well. So we've gone to the entire ambit from beginning from stakeholder communications and engagement to then helping organizations understand what the stakeholders' desires, issues, and needs are, to how do you then communicate your CSR programs, and also how do you communicate the issues that are there, right? So we've also handled a lot of not-for-profits, and in especially in the last few years, when you have issues like water and climate change, etc., how do you communicate that to the communities that you want, who need to get benefited? So we've kind of been lucky enough to travel the entire gambit of communication for development, and it's been a journey which has been a learning exercise all the time. We recently launched initiatives on sustainability reporting, which has again become mandatory in India, and therefore, there is a whole different communication around that which is coming in, and I think globally that's going to become a very major issue in terms of how do you communicate your sustainability. And from there itself is also, if you look at sustainability reporting, communications, communicating to your stakeholder and stakeholder engagement is the core, the critical part, whether whichever standards you do it. So that's where we are again now, getting into training and communications for corporates. Never ask communication people to speak about themselves. We can speak for hours together.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Nero. I will now hop over and I will go to Ed.
Thanks, Shanoy. So I'm Ed Fletcher, as Shanoy mentioned. I co-lead an agency called Shape History in London. My background, I spent 7 years in international development, mainly in like fundraising and comms roles, working in East Africa, West Africa, and South Asia, and then made the hop over to agency life in 2018. And it's quite a big claim, isn't it? It's like one of the most exciting agencies in the world. One of the kind of things that really excited me about joining Shape History was the fact that when you looked at the agency initially, you wouldn't necessarily know that it was only focused about social impact, that actually there was an energy and an excitement and a passion that kind of came through, not just kind of the brand, but the work we did and delivered. And I think that's something that we've always tried to do as an agency, is bring out that passion and excitement and energy when it comes to social impact communications. And really show also as well, and this is one of the reasons I was particularly excited to come and be part of this, that this is an exciting career space for young people, and actually this needs kind of more talent coming through. Like young people are some of the most adept at understanding the latest trends in communications, the latest channels, and for social impact to be able to move forward, to be current, to be relevant, and to be on the cutting edge, it needs new talent coming through. I think the average age in our team is about 26, and which keeps everyone on their toes. So that's one of the kind of the big reasons I was really excited to come to this evening. With Shannon mentioned that there are a lot of students in the Caribbean, particularly, but all over the world as well, who don't even know that a career in social impact communications is even a thing. So really hoping that tonight we can sort of show people out there that this is not just a career opportunity. It's one of the most exciting places to do what you love, and to forge a career in any number of fashions, depending on kind of what you're looking to specialize in. Will that do as an opening gambit, Shanoy?
Yeah, sure, that works. Thank you so much, Ed. And all right, I will now move over to Indy. And Indy, you can tell us a little bit about yourself, what your organization does, and really how you got here. How did you land into this space?
I think I really want to start with that question first, Shanoy. How did I get here? Journalism was actually my dream job from when I was 9 years old, and I actually spent 9 years in mainstream media. And then over that time, I realized that I wanted to do more than just highlight, stories of human interest stories, because a lot of times when I did stories about people having challenges, domestic violence, HIV, I wanted to help provide solutions for those persons. And my editors would say to me, no, indeed, that's not your role. Your role as a journalist is just to highlight the issues. That wasn't enough for me. And so I transitioned to Panos Caribbean, where I actually got into development communications, because we're able to go into communities, hear their stories, brainstorm with them solutions to the issues that they face, whether on climate change, environment, gender, and then we would seek funding to really provide actual assistance. And I found that very, very fulfilling. And so I spent 15 years with Panos, and then no, 11. I can't remember exactly now, but it was quite a lot of time with Panos, and then I started change communications. And primarily, well, I started change with three other very dynamic women. So I partner now, change is run with my partner, my creative director, Abigail Gardner. And primarily what we said is that we wanted to take on projects that would really be impactful. So even though Change is a for-profit company, we primarily select consultancies that really allow us to work on issues that will impact development in the long term using communications and working with communities. So I'll leave it there for now. I'll come back and talk a little more later about some concrete examples of what Change does.
All right, thank you so much for that, Indian. I'm loving the introduction. So that leaves us now to go over to Lisa to tell us a little bit about how did you get here, a little bit about what your company does, and just a little bit more about yourself that I may not have shared in your bio.
Fantastic. Thank you, Shanoy, and thank you to the other panelists and to everyone who is listening. Very similar to Indy, since forever that I could remember, wanted to be a journalist and worked as a journalist very early in my career. And in the process, discovered international development. It was not a field I knew anything about. And it was something that I really became as interested in. And I was looking for ways to combine journalism/communications and development. And in this part of the world, in Australia, kind of around 20 years ago, both development was a very difficult field to get in, but there weren't a lot of communications roles. I was fortunate to land a role with an Australian funded program in Thailand, a community development program as the communications officer, and have stayed in the field since then. It's been a varied career trajectory in the sense that I did a lot of development work that wasn't necessarily specifically focused on communications, but would always work to find a way to build communications into those projects. And I've also spent some time in this way. I love the topic today. I've always had a real interest in the crossover between development communications, but also development more broadly and corporate social responsibility work. And I've done a lot of work with resource sector projects in countries like Papua New Guinea, but also Australia, where we have applied that development approach and that communications for development approach to some of those CSR activities and projects that sit outside of the development field, but there's enormous crossover there. So I'm really excited. I think I also really liked what Mira said about the importance of stakeholder engagement, and that's been a very conscious decision around the naming of Engaging Dev. We do specialise in communications, but we are not here to tell anyone what to do. It is really about working alongside clients, alongside communities, alongside partner governments to understand information and communication needs and how we can build communications into achieving some of those very diverse, very complex, very challenging development outcomes that we're looking to pursue. And I also have a real interest in, as Ed said, working with kind of people who are emerging in their career. I do some sessional teaching here in Australia, and I love the energy and the ideas that come through universities. And I think that there will be jobs in 10, 20 years time that we don't know, but it's really about getting your feelers out there and finding opportunities, and joining opportunities like this is a fantastic way to start. So I really look forward to input from the people who are listening today as well. Thanks, Shanoy.
Thank you so much for that. All right, and just getting some beeps here. All right, great. So I think some persons were having some challenges getting on, so I've been just getting a flood of messages as we go along, but I think that's been rectified because of the different streams that people are trying to get on. So thank you so much for those introductions. I mean, it has certainly gotten us off to a very good start in terms of where we want our conversation to go today. So I think Lisa hinted at this in her introduction about how communication for development being a fairly new field. I will say, in terms of my own background, I was only introduced to the concept while working within the United Nations. So I work within the UN Caribbean cluster, and so it is within that space that I understood or even learned what communication for development was, or development communication. So, for the benefit of persons who may not know what we are speaking about, C4D means communication for development, or sometimes equated with development communications. I will give you a broad definition which says that it refers to the use of communication to facilitate social development. It engages stakeholders and policymakers, establishes conducive environments, assesses the risks and opportunities, and promotes information exchange to create positive social change via sustainable development. Development communication techniques include information dissemination and education, behavior change, social marketing, social mobilization, media advocacy, communication to social change, and community participation. So, I think the start of this definition came from the World Bank. So, in many respects, you will see from that definition that it is much more than just having a conversation or just passing along materials with information. And so, I wanted us to just dive into this a little bit more, because often I found that people who do the sort of work we're doing, change communication, social impact communication, development communication, behavior change communication, it sometimes seems to be a niche group, or certainly from where I sit, people looking on me and say, oh, seems to be a very foreign concept. Or many persons may not understand the kind of work we do. So I wanted us to break it down a little bit. And so I want to throw to our panelists, what does development communication mean to you? And you can use whatever variation you use within your organization. So, really, what does development communication mean to you? And Indy, I will start off with you on this question.
All right, thanks for that, Shanoy. For me, it's really working with people to ensure that they are informed and able to, live healthy and productive lives. And what does that look like? I work a lot with climate change, and one of the impacts that we talk about with climate change is that we will be seeing a lot more droughts. Jamaica certainly has been experiencing that in the last 10 years. And, so walking through that, for example, let's say an entity might come and decide that they are going to build a tank in Moko, for example. They come in, they go to Moko, and they build a tank, and they say, yes, we have provided a solution to drought in the community. We've done our part, corporate social responsibility and all of that. But you may go back a little 6 months down the line, and the community is still having problems with access to water. Why? Because there was no consultation. There was not, the community they were not engaged. There was no buy-in. So that's what we don't want with development communications for development. It's like flipping that approach. So we go into the community, you interact, you share, you hear what are the water solutions that people want, and then you direct that now to suit their needs. So yes, they may need a tank, but instead of putting that tank at X point, you put it at Y point where more persons are able to access it and it's more used, and so the new needs of the community are better met. So that way you have impact and you have actually addressed the problem. So for me, that's a simple example of how, with proper communication and stakeholder engagement, you are able to provide lasting solutions to some development problems that we face. And so, yeah, so that in a nutshell is what I like to start the discussion with about what C4D looks like.
All right, thank you so much for that, Indy. I saw Ed kind of nodding as we went along. So, Ed, do you want to give us a go? What does development communication or social impact communication or experience mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, I firstly agree with sort of everything that Indy said, particularly around that stakeholder consultation. And I think a few of us have already mentioned it, that communications is only as good as are only kind of effective as how much they're reflective and considerate and sensitive to the audiences that you're trying to communicate with. I think we talk a lot at Shape History about storytelling, because I think when we communications, like, ultimately we tell stories. We're storytellers, and I think quite often, particularly when we're talking about sort of social impact or development, there's a big disconnect between who you're trying to talk to and what you're trying to communicate. And a big part of our roles as communications professionals is about understanding what story it is that needs to be told. How can we creatively bring to life this subject matter, this cause, this issue, in a way that's going to resonate with people and fundamentally emotionally connect with people. I think that's probably one of the things that unfortunately we still see too much, is people projecting the way they think they need to be communicating and not really considering how it's being perceived, and by those audiences who are in need of that knowledge, that information. And so trying to understand emotionally what makes people tick, what are those intrinsic motivations, and trying to then build a story. And that comes in all forms of different kind of mediums, not just from sort of words, but the way we express things, through events, through partnerships. These are all for us kind of storytelling tropes. So that, I guess, is at the kind of the center of how we think about communications for development, is telling stories that connect people with information and knowledge in a way that is right for them, and that can take people on a path to achieving the social outcomes that we're all looking for, in whatever field that might be.
Thank you so much for that, Ed. Pretty solid. So, as we've been getting from the discussion, is that it goes beyond, as we would have been saying, just visibility for sure. And it really speaks about connecting with people and their different needs. But I won't jump in much further. I'm going to jump over now to Mira to just tell us a little bit about what this means for you. And I'm very, I want all of you who are watching to note, I don't know if you would have heard when I read Mira's background, because Mira didn't necessarily start off in the communications for development space, but she has quite a bit of interesting skill sets that has led her to this point. So Mira, we want to know, what does development communication mean to you?
So for me, everything in communications begins with a simple philosophy that everybody thinks they have communicated, whereas in most cases we've not, right? So this whole concept of communications, and especially in cases of development, begins from the perspective as to what is the level of understanding of each audience, and what is the meaning of that terminology for each audience. And very often in a country like India, where there are about 30 languages minimum that are used on a day-to-day basis, right? So when you use the word communication, it is a much larger spectrum, because what you are trying to communicate and the nuances of that communication is completely different. It differs from region to region, right? So when you talk about communication for development, and you talk about creating change or creating development, the definition of development itself and the process by which you will go through that development needs to be explained to different audiences. Okay? And again, when you say needs to be explained, it's a very up down kind of, the moment you say needs to be explained, you're saying you're on top and somebody needs to be explained. So therefore, I think C4D breaks that and says that you look at define development by each audience perspective, and then have a discussion about how do you achieve the development of society, and how do you achieve development of that particular society, and then define how the entire process is going to be. And from that, if you begin the communication perspective, you realize that your entire strategy for development completely changes, because of understanding the perspective of different audiences. I hope that makes sense.
Indeed it does. Indeed it does. So thank you so much for that as well, Mira. Because a key thing as well, as I'm getting from the conversation here, is really starting from the needs of people and really, using that to lead. Because for many times we have seen people, for all intents and purposes, we think we're doing good. We go into a community and say, these people need this. And we give what we think these people need. But then if we really were doing a sort of inclusive process, we would have recognized that we need to be way more consultative and include people in the process to real impact and to real change within their lives. So Lisa, I will hop over to you now in terms of what does development communication mean to you?
Thanks, Shanoy. I think for me, one of the ways I find helps me when explaining development communications is explaining what it's not. And I find particularly in the Australian context and development programs, there is a very big focus on communications. And a lot of that is really focused on communicating about a development initiative, what we're doing, who we're doing it with, and why. And that's very important. And there's a real place for that within the work that we do. But the development communications, or communicating for development, is really focused on supporting the achievement or the progression towards certain development outcomes. And I think it's about working with everyone involved in those programs, communities, it may be government partners, it may be teachers within a school, and understanding where they're at. And as Mira said, identifying the audiences, identifying the information that they have, working with them on the messages. They're often the experts in their particular area. And it's really about ensuring that you're providing enough information that people can make informed decisions about what really is their lives. And it's really not an approach of telling people what to do, but it's building that momentum and that change through good, credible, clear information that you don't always necessarily create, but you get that from the people that you're working with in any particular project.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Lisa. So, I'm trusting that for the audience who would have been tuned in here, you're getting many different variations, but they're all pointing to the same axis in terms of what development communications is, in terms of what it isn't. And I mean, especially with us doing this conversation today within the context of corporate social responsibility, I specifically wanted to make mention that often in our corporate social responsibility initiatives, we start from a good point. We say, all right, this is what we're going to do. And we say, all right, we are going to look at it to say, all right, this school needs a pedestrian crossing, just for example's sake. And we're going to go out and we're going to build a pedestrian crossing for the students there. But a key part of the process, or what a development communications approach would have done, is to have complemented that, for example, with road safety education or road safety tips. Because why are we putting the crossing there in the first place? We're trying to deter the incidences, or we're trying to prevent the number of accidents that are there. And then in terms of assessing the stakeholders, we've been looking at multiple ways to say, are the students the ones who are creating the accidents because they're rushing across the street? Or is it that the vehicles that are traversing that area are not maintaining speed limits? So a development-focused approach would look at all of these variables and these axes. It would not just look at, let us put a pedestrian crossing and use that to solve the problem, but it also looks at how active behavior change can be done through consultations. You're talking to the students who are in the space, you're probably talking to the teachers who see the students crossing the street. You're looking into variables such as, what is the speed limit in the zone? Are people observing the speed limit? And so much more. I wanted to just say again, for all of those who are tuning in, if you do have questions, remember, whatever platform you're joining, you can drop your questions in the comment section and we will see them across all platforms, whether you're joining from Facebook, Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube. So we encourage you, to get involved in the conversation. If there's anything at all you want clarified as we go along, feel free to share that with us and we will get along with that. So we have done a little bit thus far in terms of, setting the stage of what development communications is and what it isn't. We've spoken a little bit about our different backgrounds as well, and sort of what got us into this space, and really maybe even why we're passionate about this space. And so I now wanted to shift gears a little to talk about impact. And I want each member of the panel, because we're giving people in real terms, what does this look like? This is not just academia. This is not just talking in high-flung terms, etc. We really want to break it down for persons. And so when we're saying impact, I want each of us as members of the panel to sort of talk about a standout initiative where you have used like a development focus approach, a development communications approach, and the positive results that you have reaped. And of course, if it is in a corporate social responsibility context, you can refer to that as well. So we'll talk about and the standout initiative that you have used, a development communications approach, and the positive results that you have reaped rather in this space. And I will start off with Mira for this particular question.
Okay, so I've had a couple of very interesting experiences, with corporates who are clients. So these are clients who are working in the rural areas. I mean, they have their factories and plants in the rural areas, and they're doing phenomenal work. They were investing a lot in the community, and we did an audit of, kind of communication audit and an image audit, PR audit of the community, and we asked them, "What do you think about this corporate?" And these are corporates which are large, in that area, they would be the largest employers. They would be, they build banks, they build the hospitals, they build the schools. So they've kind of created the infrastructure, and so we were, extremely, kicked off about doing the audit, and we were surprised to know that the community literally hated them. And and when we went into this discussion a little further, and we realized that, so there would be instances, for example, that they would do tree planting, and which was an absolutely necessity for that area. But the team that would actually do the tree planting would randomly plant the trees, just where they wished. So there would be trees in front of somebody's door, on another factory's gate. And so there was a complete chaos of where the trees were being planted, which actually caused problems for the community. Similarly, when they had floods, etc., and the factory helped the people, with money, with medical aid, etc. But the response was that, of course, they helped, but the team that actually did the work ensured that they were told, the community was told 1,000 times, "Look, we helped you, look, we helped you, look, we helped you, you got to be absolutely, thankful to us," which basically resulted in the community kind of feeling very uh, pressured into liking whatever was being done. So although the intent of the company was very good, there was a lot of investments being made into the community. The management's intent was right, but what happens at implementation level, and that's when your CSR and C4D actually collide, is that what happens at the ground level is, if you're not communicating to the community and explaining what you're doing, why you're doing, and not understanding why there is not even getting the feedback on a regular basis that this is something that they want or they don't want. What you actually tried to do was CSR. What you actually ended up doing was actually aggravating the community. So I think that was for us an extremely, we've had a couple of experiences of, instances like that, where the intent of the company was right, but at the execution and implementation level, the communication was a mess. And then, of course, we redid the entire thing, and uh, you know developed a communication with the process, with the community, and kind of sorted things out. But that was an extremely learning process for us from a CSR perspective.
Hey, thank you so much for that, Mira. All right, so I will hop over and I will ask Indy, and then after that I will go to Ed and then to Lisa. So Indy, share with us one uh, one development communications initiative that you think had positive outcomes, and if you can link it in a CSR context as well, that would be appreciated.
I was torn about what to share for this one, but let me start with you mentioned one keyword there, which is impact. And one of the things I like about communication for development is taking an evidence-based approach. So a lot of the time, sometimes with communication, some what you may think that okay, this particular radio station is the most popular in the island, so let me just put my ads there. But really and truly, that may not be the most effective space to reach your audience, the audience that you want. Because, for example, maybe working with rural farmers, you may need to find do a little research to see what programs do the farmers actually listen, and then put your information there. And for me, it was very instructive working with the Community Disaster Risk Reduction Fund of the Caribbean Development Bank. They had projects in 4 islands, and one of the key things that they did were was to get surveys done. So we did what's called knowledge, attitude, and practice surveys in the islands. We wanted to see what people knew, for example, about climate change. What was their attitude? How did they feel about it? Did they think it's something that should be a priority or not? And also, what were they doing about it? Did they care enough to actually do something concrete? And based on the findings of those caps, we could then effectively target the messages, the interactions, and the solutions that we were gonna implement, on the ground. And that was really quite impactful because we were going to the source, with information. And also for impact, it's about measuring impact. So when you have an idea, when you're starting out with a project of, okay, these are the knowledge levels of people. So people don't know much about climate change. When you finish the project after a year or two and you do that follow-up survey again, you may find that 20%, 30% more persons are aware. So you can measure impact and say, yes, this work is really changing and transforming lives and knowledge levels. So yeah, those are some of the things that you take into consideration with the equation.
Thank you so much for that, Indy. Something that stood out from Indy's presentation just now is that she said the words, we should be in a position to measure impact, right? And so that is significant because there are many times we would have seen that we have different conversations and different initiatives, etc. And people, we are measuring visibility. We are measuring how many people are seeing what we're doing. Sometimes we're measuring how many people are accessing what we're doing. But is that really equating to impact? So I won't go into too much more. Some questions are coming in. We will try to address them in short order, but keep them coming. I will soon get to those. But I'll jump over now to Ed to ask about, one initiative that you have done, the impact that stands out to you, and really, in terms of the positive change that was arrived at through using a development focused approach.
Thanks, Shanoy. Yeah, it's a challenging one to sort of focus in on. One, I think probably the one that I want to just highlight is a project we ran with one of our biggest and longest standing partners, Foundation Botner, who are a foundation that is investing in programs and initiatives around the world that's looking to pioneer new digital health or digital solutions to global health problems, particularly focused with young people and adolescents. And I think a year or two back, we developed and worked on a campaign in collaboration with Botner and the UN Environment to launch a global kind of competition to engage young people with the conversation around how could their cities be better designed and what new digital technologies could be introduced to make them healthier cities. And the team spent a long time sort of like ideating and planning out this campaign of like how to engage young people in a truly authentic way that didn't feel tokenistic, where young people felt that their opinions were going to be heard and valued and acted upon. And then how could we create a campaign that gave young people different ways to interact? So even down to thinking about how will people submit their ideas for what their cities could be doing more effectively. And the campaign ran for a couple of months, and we received, I think, over 100 different applications and responses from young people who are looking at everything from digitizing skate parks to utilize them to utilize kind of these spaces where young people would congregate as education points for digital health. That there were these incredible ideas that were generated through written responses, through videos, through incredibly elaborate presentations, and everything in between. And the outcomes, well, one, it was giving kind of young people a voice and giving them the opportunity to feel a platform to feel heard by some of the most influential partners at sort of a governmental and intergovernmental level, to hear their thoughts and ideas. And that in itself was an incredible outcome, to close that gap between the public and these kind of big infrastructural projects, and making them feel like they had an opportunity to really shape the future of their city. And also that there were some incredible ideas that were generated, and ones that have since been acted upon, where cities are now looking to implement those ideas for greater improvement in the health of their entire cities. So that's one that particularly stands out for me in terms of thinking about taking what had never really been done before, and taking it to a global level, and not just inspiring young people to be more engaged. I mean, young people are incredibly engaged anyway in activism, but be really engaged in thinking about how their city functions and how they could contribute to that. But also the actual ideas themselves were incredibly inspiring, and it's still a project. Although it ended about over a year ago, we still talk about it in the office today as one of the ones that has really inspired us.
Thank you so much for that, Ed. And something that stood out for me is that, as you said, in terms of the audience you're working with, giving them, and again, it's touching on the inclusiveness. It's really getting to the heart of what people really want and working with them to deliver that. So it stood out that Ed said, that by giving young people a voice and a platform to be heard, it made that project impactful. So again, development communication does this a lot. We really focus on our audience segmentation, but in a way that we're including them in the process. It's not that we're sitting in a room somewhere and saying, well, this is what people want, and we're going to give it to them. But we're also consulting with people in many different ways from the start. It's like, I always say, we do process research. So you're finding out from people at the start, you're crafting the messages, you're getting the feedback as you go along. You're implementing the campaign, you're also getting feedback to see what needs to be tailored. And so for persons who are watching, a key standout that I want to make is that development communications takes time often. So it's not a snap and go. And in many instances, if you're really keen on delivering impact and having change, you have to be committed to at least having some time frames, etc. So I see some questions coming in. I will take some, but I will go to Lisa right now to just share, in terms of one of the initiatives that stands out that delivered positive impact by using a development communications approach. Lisa, over to you.
Thanks, Shanoy. And I think it is really hard to hone on examples of this, because it is such a kind of back and forth process a lot of the time when you're using this development communications approach. But I have looked at an example that was focused around a campaign, which was for International Day of Disabilities a couple of years ago. And we often use these international days to communicate, but they are sometimes kind of a marketing approach for an organisation to get themselves out there, to get some visibility. And I was working with a program in Australia at that point called the Australian Humanitarian Partnership, which delivers humanitarian responses globally, but also works across the Pacific on disaster preparedness. And we do a lot of work with disabled people's organisations across the Pacific. And I had this idea that I wanted to work with them on International Day of People with Disabilities, but we wanted to have them run the campaign, create the content, develop the messages, actually want to be involved in it too. So we really did go out to them first and say, this is voluntary, you don't need to be, it's not something that you have to do. I did reach out to an organisation in Australia who specialises in disability inclusion and communicating disability inclusion to get some advice around the campaign. And then we put the call out to the disabled people's organisations in the Pacific, and it was just fantastic, the response. And what it meant in terms of, I hate the word, but a trade-off. So we lost control over the design of the products that would come out. We really put it onto the disabled people organisations. You craft the messaging, you take the photos, you decide how you're depicted, you let us know what you want to be said, what are the messages that you want to be standing out throughout this campaign. And the response was fantastic. And while we didn't have really fancy designs, social media cards, etc., what we had, and we had photos taken with iPhones, and people didn't always have a printer. So I think in some instances we would have a piece of paper with some writing on it. But for me, it was by putting control in the hands of the people who the story was about, those messages were much greater impact and much more powerful. And I think trading off what might be a more polished communications approach for really amplifying the voices of the people that we wanted heard through that campaign was a trade-off that was worth making.
Thank you so much for that. Something that you said stands out again about, it may not have been the glossiest campaign, but it delivered impact. And I can't stress that enough, that in terms of development communications, it's like getting to the granular level, it's getting to the grassroots level even. So as Lisa rightly said, it may not be the most glamorous stuff. I've often said to persons who are trying to do development campaigns as well some of the times that it's not all frills and bells and whistles. It's really about what's connecting. So the truth is often we're tempted that in trying to deliver change, we are aiming for a national campaign to do the bells and whistles with radio, TV, print, etc. But if, for example, our target audience are rural farmers in a specific community, then an initiative that may work much better is to have a farmer field school, for example, where we're on the ground with the farmers, working with them to say, okay, what is the current practice that you're using for farming? It's a harmful practice that is reducing the yields and the types of quantities that you're getting. And how can you correct this? And from talking to these farmers, we may find farmer B may say, okay, well, this is something I have done that has worked in my favor. And on the ground, there are other farmers there who are able to test and repeat this process and come to a conclusion that, yes, this works. It helps them to get rid of a harmful practice they may have been using otherwise, and this now works in their favor. So I absolutely love that, Lisa, that you made that point about it not always being the most glamorous look and feel, but really, is it delivering impact? Is it really making a change in the lives of the people that we're trying to make a change in the lives of? All right, I will hop over quickly to some questions that are coming in here via or different social media platforms. Again, for those of you who are watching, we are streaming from LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. On any of these platforms, you are free to drop a question and we will respond to them as we go along. So I see someone here, I just made a comment. Yes, I think this was when India was speaking about, making sure you're selecting the right channels. Lisa hinted on that as well, etc. And she said that's true because who you want may not listen to that station, for example. So, again, align with your target audiences. Where are you putting the messages if they're not connected with this? I do have a question here, and this is open to our panelists. Someone here, thank you. I wanted to ask, how best can one access training around C4D and gain access to the market? So for this panelist, I will throw that out to you and we can share general feedback for this person who's asking, how do you access this field and gain access to the market?
I'll dive in. I think the key thing is being proactive. So particularly at Shape History, we're not necessarily looking for people who have got huge experience all the time, but we always say we hire on kind of culture first, and people who show a real passion for any particular area of social impact, and being proactive, putting yourself out there. There are enough organizations out there that there will be those willing to give people the opportunity, even if it's just work experience or internships to get your feet under the table. And I'm a big believer that the best kind of form of training is by doing, and being involved, being kind of as proactively involved. And that may not be with a communications agency or a communications consultancy. It may be working directly with a charity or not for profit, an NGO, and going and offering your services and testing them in that field. But I think the key thing that I would always sort of suggest is be proactive. Don't wait for opportunities to come to you. Go out and find them, and if they aren't in your immediate sphere, like craft them yourself. It's incredible how resourceful people can be. To put together campaigns or ideas or initiatives. And the training will come through experience. I think that's the best form of training is through doing and learning and making mistakes and recognizing that it's fine to make mistakes, because it's the best way to learn. I don't know if any other panelists have any other thoughts.
I wanted to share a little bit too. For the Caribbean, I would say in terms of formal education, Caribbean Institute for Media and Communications at UWI, is one place that you could check to see what the course offerings are like. Um, for myself, I got into it in a roundabout way because I did study media and communications as my first degree at Carimac. However, I moved on to do counseling psychology, which I started from scratch to do the masters in, and then I sort of combined both for work. So mine wasn't really a formal program of study per se. So I do agree with Ed in that, you have to go and do. And I can say that it is a growing market because it's still a, very, very young in its establishment. So it's the perfect time to make links with some of the entities that are there. Shanoy would have mentioned that some of the UN organizations do ask for that and do give internships and experiences around communications for development. And you have entities now like myself, Infinity, and all the partners here who probably would work with some young persons, to do some of the training and development. So it's about doing the research and exploring what's out there.
Okay. Anyone else? Nira? I see Nira wants to go. Nira, over to you. I think you're muted.
One thing students should do is reflect a bit on which part of development they're interested in. Like, are you interested in climate change, for instance? So you probably need to understand a bit of environment science or a bit of environment. So you kind of take internships or programs which connect with you with that subject. Some if you're interested in working with ground level, or if you're interested in working with development and infrastructure. I think if you have some kind of a passion existing already, then that's the kind of internship and programs that you should take. So that kind of hones your basic knowledge about that area also.
Okay. All right, thanks for that. And I will just add as well, I think as Indy referenced it, I mean, my own story was a little different because I directly studied that. So when I went to media school, I actually studied what was called, it was called social marketing, not to be confused with social media marketing. And really what it looks at is using marketing approaches to address social issues. And so and that's one of the reasons why for this session, I also had opened up the scope for people who are studying marketing, because those skill sets you're learning in commercial marketing practice can in fact be applied in the social space. So I studied that program. It kind of showed you how to do the cross-cutting areas. And then when I really got a chance to do that in practice when working in the UN system, I will say though that even before going into the UN system, I worked within the government, within my own country, and under the national security portfolio, we did in fact implement quite a few initiatives that were aimed at, steering away young people from a life of crime. So that is one way. You may not think about it in a straightforward manner that you may be able to take a development focused approach. But really, in trying to drive behavior change, it's about thinking long term, looking at impact, looking at sustainability, including and engaging people in the process. And I think if you start off with that mindset, you can in fact find different opportunities. In terms of training, etc., I will say, I think if you look for some of, I believe maybe UNICEF in particular may have some free C4D training. So that's something, if you're on our mailing list, we can send some resources to you on that as well. And apart from that, access to the market, I think we would have touched on volunteerism, looking out for the opportunities, not just with international organizations, because that's a key thing. I find many people think they can only do or apply development communications focus if they're working with the UN or the EU, etc. But through companies, as Indy said, Shape History, Engage in Dev, Add Arrowhand Communication, Infinity, Change Communications, etc. This is what we're doing. And also, if you're already in a corporate job, if you're already in an NGO job, if you're already within several spaces, you can start to drive this conversation with your organization to see how else can we use what we're doing to deliver true impact. So we do have another question that I will just take before we move over. And Lisa is asking, how do you measure behavior change in relation to your projects? Are there tools or conceptual frameworks that you use to help to measure impact? Lisa, this sounds like a thesis question, but I will throw it out to the panelists in case anyone wants to give it a go.
I can take this one, Shanoy, and I know Lisa, so hi Lisa, it's great to see you. And I'm saying I'll take this question, but I don't necessarily have an answer. But I do think this is really important. And I know I'm working with a program currently in Vietnam, and we are working on the strategy for the second phase of this program. And we're asking ourselves, how are we actually going to assess what we've achieved with our communications in phase one? And it's very difficult because you're working across broad geographical areas, you're working across many different communities. And on this particular program, we're working with businesses, we're working with different levels of government. So it's a question that we don't have an answer for, and I don't have an answer for you, Lisa, but I do think it's important. And I know we've mentioned a couple of times today about measuring our impact. And it's really difficult because often when we talk about measuring impact, we want something concrete. We want to be able to say we reached this many people and this was the change. But when we're dealing with the behavior of people, and change doesn't happen for everyone at the same time, and it's not linear. For me, it's very difficult to really nut out how we monitor that change and particularly how we measure it. With the program that I'm working with in Vietnam, one of the outcomes that we're working towards on that program is actual change in attitudes around gender equality, increasing women's participation in businesses, in markets, and particularly in ethnic groups within Northwest Vietnam. So we've actually gone out to market to find specialised behaviour change communication specialists, and it's very early stages. I think I have my first meeting with them next week, but I'm really interested to see what that kind of specialist area brings into this space, because it's a really important question, and it's something that we shouldn't shy away from. We absolutely should be continuing to work towards how we measure our impact. And my only other comment on that is that impact is not always going to be quantitative, and so we can't drop the importance of qualitative research and qualitative assessments, because we are in the business of people and we're all different. And as I mentioned, that change is not the same for everyone. It's not linear, and it's really it also changes all the time. So it's a really tricky area to get our heads around, but I think it is really, really important.
Can I also feed in on that one? Because I would say I agree with you that there is not a one size fits all answer to this. But I do think if you're working on projects, for example, you can try to work within the regular monitoring and evaluation cycle of a project. So you would start off with doing your baseline assessment at the start of the project to find out where things are that you can, and you use that to measure further down, progress. And I would say the communication or the behavior change element is to try, well, if you're looking at it from the numbers part, the quantitative component, try to incorporate, communications questions that will capture some of the changes and transitions in the quantitative component of the survey or whatever mechanism the monitoring and evaluation takes. So for you have your baseline, if you have your mid-year or midterm um, monitoring and evaluation, and you have your final evaluation. So you try to use those project cycle milestones as part of how you measure. I think to the point about not all impact is, you can measure quantitatively. So what we tend to use at Change, and even as a practitioner separately, is to put in ways to capture the qualitative. So a lot of the times we do lessons learned for videos, for example, where we really try to get the stories of change from the communities, from our target audience, to show that yes, when I started out, I could not speak before an audience, and after all of the capacity building that I've had in this project, now I'm confident to speak on, in whatever forum with media and so on. So you get the community persons or your target audience to really talk about some of the changes that has happened. So that also adds value to the numbers, the number of persons impacted. You hear the actual stories, so lessons learned stories, and sometimes best practices. This worked really well. Is this something we can look at replicating or investing in more or scaling up? So those are some of the ways that you sort of capture changes in behavior and behavior patterns, well, from my experience.
Thank you so much for that, Indy. And I pulled here just from both what you and Lisa have said, that measuring impact can take both qualitative and quantitative approaches. And again, it's also dependent on what your starting point is. What if it's a numbers game and you're saying, all right, you want to see how many people move from point A to point B. I think a significant thing that is standing out here is research. I think, as we've been harping on, and the role that this research plays from a starting point to a midpoint to an end point, for example. And so I think once you're guided by the research as well, you can see how you need to be making modifications. You can see what is being changed. You can also admit that your goals were probably too ambitious, and so you may need to have adjusted them accordingly. Because I always say to people where behavior change initiatives are concerned, you want to be looking at, there are several layers. There are people who are in the drop of a hat, are going to be ready to adopt the behavior. We call them the early adopters. Then there are other people who just need a little bit of convincing to adopt the behavior. And then there's still some people who are staunch resistance. And so if you set your benchmark to change 100% of behavior, and then you get to those people who are staunch resistors, then you are going to be almost like shooting yourself in the foot with that. So, again, just being guided by the research, understanding who you're targeting, understanding the initiatives that you're delivering will really help you to see the best approach to measuring impact. So we have been talking for quite a while, and because I want to just give my panelists a little chance to drink a little water, etc., and also to sort of break up the flow a little bit, we are now going to take a slight commercial break. Let's call it a slight development communications break, and I will show to you a video from Shape History, which showcases a bit of the work that they do.
Freedom and justice, freedom and justice. I have a dream. We are storytellers, writers, artists who abhor unfairness and despise hypocrisy.
People are suffering. people are dying.
The future is as wide as dreams are high.
Freedom and justice, freedom and justice, freedom and justice. I have a dream.
The ayes have it.
Awesome. I love that, Ed. I probably would have told you this before. I love your tagline there, to create a fairer world faster. And I think in many respects, that is what we're all aiming to do as development communications persons. We see that there are gaps in society. We see that there are many different ways in which we can be addressing these changes. And we, through communication as a tool, are committed to using it within that space. And I don't know if you wanted to add anything in particular for anyone who saw your video just now and sort of kind of wanted to understand maybe the concept behind it or anything of sorts. So the floor is yours if that is something that you wanted to do. So Ed said, this is our super video. Love the video, Ed. Shout out to our brand director, Luke, for that. All right, so Ed, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, just to pick up that point around like a fair world faster, we went through a bit of like an internal branding exercise, which is always a dangerous journey for an agency that does branding. And I think that was the thing that was where we feel that communications development has such an integral role to play, is that there are countless organizations and individuals who are looking to make the world a fairer place, where we see our role is about bringing in strategic communications, creative storytelling to accelerate ourselves and the world towards those social outcomes. And I think that's what that video that we created, which is almost 2.5 years ago now, and it's reminded me, it's cool looking back, because it is a compilation of everything we did actually only in 12 months, including changing a law around or supporting a campaign to change the law around same-sex marriage in the UK. And that's the sentiment we were trying to get across, is that acceleration of outcomes, of ambition, of recognizing that there are huge challenges that face the world. And one of the things that we developed when we were doing this rebrand was thinking about the way we think about identity of organizations. And we developed this idea of a defining attitude that sits at the core of every organization, every campaign, every piece of communications. It's the driving force. And for us, it was we decided end up our own one being, why not the impossible? Because for us, we feel, I think for so many communication specialists, it's our jobs to sort of question the status quo, to understand the challenges and the barriers that people have faced in terms of achieving social impact, and understand how we can be that bridge to a place that people may not have thought was possible. So yeah, that's kind of a little bit of thinking behind the backstory to that video. And as I said, I think a big shout out to our brand director Louise, who spent night and day toiling over that down to the last micro detail. And yeah, it's just it's a little kind of nod to all the exceptional partners that we work with and that we have the privilege of supporting to accelerate their impact.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Ed. I think you're just still there on Main Street. So, all right, so thank you. I mean, I really have appreciated those of you who have stayed with us thus far, and we don't have much further to go. But, we did say that this event has twofold. We wanted to highlight opportunities for corporate entities that are doing CSR, NGOs, etc., who are keen on doing good, and really wanted to bring to the fore how communication can help to make that more impactful. So I now have a question for panelists again. And this is directed for the students who are here. So for students who are hesitant about their career prospects that are aligned with their diverse areas of study, what is one industry-specific advice you would give? And so as a little bit of context, as I said, we would have invited students who are studying communications, students who are doing marketing, students who are probably doing social work, etc., or students who are just interested in social issues, or just people who they don't even know what communication for development is, but it sounds like something that they probably want to be involved with. I mean, it says communication and it says development together. And so I wanted us as the panelists to kind of say to these people who are hesitant, you're probably doing a communications degree, you're doing a marketing degree, you're doing a social related degree, and you don't know where next to go. I wanted us to kind of just share a little bit with them in terms of the career prospects and how they could probably merge over. Or as a matter of fact, what is one industry specific advice you give to people who are not yet in the industry we're in, but they are hesitant and they're on the fence and they want some sort of reassurance or motivation. All right.
I
I
can
think
jump in.
I'll jump in.
Oh, you go, Indy.
Oh, okay. Well, one of the things that I would say, or one of the fears I had when I was a student was, Lord, I don't want a boring job, a regular 9 to 5 where I can't wait to leave. And so for me, this is one field where you never have a dull moment. It's always interesting, always exciting, um, very, very impactful. And I have found the opportunities for meeting people, learning from different cultures, traveling to different countries. This work has really carried me to over 40 countries, almost 50. And so it's very, very dynamic. And so if you're that sort of person that wants a job that will really appeal to keeping you interested, then this is one area that you definitely want to explore.
All right. Thank you for that, Indy. I think Lisa had wanted to add something. Lisa, over to you.
Thanks, Shania. Thanks, Indy. It was very similar. I think I find working communications and working in development more broadly, it's incredibly versatile. You do get to work across countries and cultures that you otherwise wouldn't. It can be a little bit heartbreaking and frustrating at times, but and it's a very complex area, but I love that complexity about it. And I have at points in my career kind of jumped out of development and done a little bit of work in the private sector or non-development focused. And every time I've done that, I couldn't wait to get back into the field. And so I think that it really is just a dynamic, as Indy said, area. There's like, you can really hone in and focus on a specific area, or you could work across all the sectors that fall under that kind of very, very broad scope of international development. And my one piece of advice, whether you're comms or development or trying to merge both, is to really just, you're so fortunate as students these days that you can create content and you can publish content and start a little website, do some little social media posts, and that just demonstrates to future employers that you've got those skills, but that you're also showing initiative, and you can really start to build a portfolio before you finish university. And I think that's just such a fantastic outlet and creative opportunity that students have now that we didn't have when I was at university.
I just want to build on Lisa's point. I totally agree. I think like there's a bit of a, and I certainly felt this when you kind of hear the term like agency or communication sector. There's almost this sort of mystery about it, being like this sort of like space of the unknown. And like if you've got a social media app, if you have ever written a letter or done a piece of writing, if you've ever drawn or illustrated or designed or edited something, like you've done communications. It's that it's in us, all around us. Like if you've had a conversation with people and you convince someone of an argument, you've done communications. So I think my piece of advice would be, don't be overwhelmed by the unknowns, because more often than not, there are people who've been doing this for a lot longer than you would have been doing, who will still be figuring it out, and will still be kind of making mistakes and learning from them. But the one thing, I think the key thing that when I joined the space, and I did history at university, I did not have a communications degree, and I still don't. It was around the fact of understanding how much knowledge you've actually already got around communications, that is just ingrained within you, and then it's a case of repurposing it and giving it purpose and giving it a strategic undertone that points in the right direction. So if you're kind of considering it, like, don't be overwhelmed by what you don't know, because there will be that with any industry you go into, and it's only by taking that kind of first leap that you can you'll realize that actually you know more than you think. And and being able to utilize that effectively in this space is just something that's incredibly rewarding and exciting and hard work, but entirely worth it. And as Lisa said, you may do kind of the odd piece that isn't necessarily social impact focused, and what you'll find is that you kind of can't wait to get back to it.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. And Mira, did you want to add something?
So what I would add would be that a lot of change, a lot of development is happening in areas which is affecting the youth the most, and therefore the perspective of youth is very important in this whole conversation. So if you can just get a bit aware about the issues that are in trend right now, or the issues that people are talking about, that would be issues that affect your friends and your peers, and that's what you bring to the table. So the more interest that you take around things that are happening around you, the more you're more geared towards contributing to this area.
All right, thank you so much for that, Mira. And so I would just in particular want to add as well, even just to all of what is being said in terms of students, that even from my own perspective, I remember, I think I would have said, I did an interview years ago, and I was probably 15 years old. And at the time, the interviewer asked me what I wanted to do. And I said simply that I wanted to help people. At the time, I think I wanted to become a medical doctor. And so, in many respects, I didn't always know or understand how I could use communication to help people. But by being in this particular field that I'm in, I have now been able to make that transition. I can proudly stand and say, all right, I've implemented behavior change campaigns around health initiatives, how to help people to keep themselves safe if they're engaging in harmful practices. You're looking at other things to say, okay, we're implementing campaigns to say, how can people preserve the environment, not just for themselves, but for future generations. We're doing campaigns looking at how we can produce food in a better manner, that we're not depleting the environment. We can look at how we can coexist with nature. We're living near the forest reserves, but we're not deforesting because there are alternative livelihoods that we've had in the space. So from my end, I would say to the student, just start from a point of wanting to be a change maker, and then that will easily allow you to transition within this space. As I say to people all the time within our hiring process here at Infinity IMC, I'm always upfront in the interviews, etc. And I say, if you are looking for something that may seem like the most terribly exciting thing in the world, right? It may not be a good starting point for you, but start with what you can contribute to make it the most exciting things. We, in our field, we're off the beaten tracks. We're often behind the scenes. We're out in the bushes, etc. It's not always the glitz and glamour that you'd expect from some communications role, but if you are committed to driving positive change, if you are committed to doing what you can in whatever pocket you can to see societal impact or to do any form of improvement for the lives of people within society, then this is the field for you. So that would be my advice for people who are on the fence, people who are a little hesitant, people who didn't even know that there are prospects out there, that yes, there are prospects. They may not always look the way you had anticipated. It may not always be that you're doing work through the international organizations that you anticipated, but there are several ways that you can start with your background and a passion for change and then implement accordingly. All right. So again, remember we're winding down, but if there are any questions that you have, please feel free to drop them in the comment section and we will address them as we go along. So I'm going to shift gears slightly again, and I am going to be just, thanking for all of you who have been watching, etc., wanting to just highlight the purpose we're here. There are different organizations, and we will just, just give some more recognition to our partners with this little video again. the reason why we had this slide, you will see from it as well, is that there were several words on screen, and it really summarizes the sort of work we do. I'm a C4D world changer. I'm using communications for good. I'm using communications to change lives. I'm using communications for social impact. And that's really what C4D is all about. And so I'm going to jump gears again, to just get our panelists in terms of, we touched a little bit on the students, and we now want to stay for organizations that are tuned in here, for organizations that are doing corporate social responsibility initiatives, etc. What is a key distinguishing edge that you would say that a development focused approach can give to their CSR initiatives? So they're doing CSR initiatives, they may not be taking a development focused approach. And what is an edge? What is a distinguishing edge? Or what's a key difference that you would say that they could get by taking a development focused approach to these initiatives? Don't all go at once now.
An edge that I would see by taking a development focused approach is it comes down to credibility, and I think that genuine desire to make change through that CSR approach. And I think corporations can walk a fine line between what is perhaps branded or communicated as being CSR, but is more of there's a risk that it can look like a marketing ploy. And by taking a development communications approach, it's that longer term, it's that really listening to the groups that you're working with and moving towards change as opposed to a short, sharp activity, I guess, for want of a better word.
All right, thank you for that, Lisa.
I would want. Oops. But I would want to endorse what Lisa had said, and just to add that it's legacy work. So it depends on what you want as a corporate entity. But if you want to have and leave that lasting impact, then communication for development is for you, because most of the times when properly applied, it's something that's sustainable and that generations to come can benefit from. So that would be the edge that I think communication for development brings.
One thing just to add, and this is maybe taking things a bit far, but I'd almost challenge corporates to stop thinking about it as CSR and more ask themselves the question: how can we as a business be more sustainable, equitable, and inclusive across every aspect of what it does? And I think that you're kind of starting to see the shift certainly in the UK, away from sort of CSR being this piece on the side that the companies do. They think about social impact in that space, but rather think more holistically about them as a company, and what kind of meaningful impact can be created that achieves kind of tangible outcomes of change. So I think for me it's a bit of a mindset shift for corporates to really to look at their impact holistically and focus on those long-term strategic impact goals that align with their business objectives. The more that those two can come close and shorten the gap or reduce the gap between the two of those, the more naturally it will come, the more authentic, to Lisa's point, that it will feel, and the more successful they will be.
Thank you so much for that, Ed. So, I've seen persons in the comments agreeing, etc., that that there's this real opportunity there to drive long-term change. Mira, did you want to add anything?
Right. I agree with what Ed has said. It's important for corporates to connect it to sustainability and look at the entire stakeholder pipeline, right from supply chain to your customers, and see at what points you can, your sales and have a CSR strategy which connects with the stakeholders at different points and creates an impact at different instances. So whether like for instance, if you're a company which uses agricultural produce, can you do something for the farmers? If you are, so you have a connect directly to your actual functioning and operations then that has absolutely great value for the society and for the company also.
Thank you so much for that, Mira. And just to add to everything that everyone has been saying, and as someone who is a believer, I think a key thing is that there are many corporate entities already doing work or already showcasing that they want to have impact. We also have to remember the audiences that we're interacting with. We have a far more discriminate audience, so they will look at it and say, you're not doing this from a good place. You're just doing this for the visibility, or you're just doing this I think, as Ed was pointing out, to just not see this as a standalone bit, but really what is the core of your organization, what is the essence of your organization. So many of the bits that are being used as corporate social initiatives, in many respects, they're really visibility initiatives. And there's a real opportunity for you to drive lasting change if you take an approach that incorporates research, that incorporates inclusion of the target audiences, that incorporates long-term thinking, and that incorporates sustainability approaches. So if there's anything I want to say as my charge to corporate entities would be to look carefully. And if within your organization you're not equipped, or if you don't have teams, etc., there are organizations such as the ones represented on this panel here that are doing this, not just with international organizations, not just with development organizations, but with corporate entities that are committed to really seeing a change. And there's an example I use all the time. Instead of, say, you're doing a one-day initiative, for example, say, all right, on this particular day, I am going to give someone some money to help them out of a situation. There is always validity in the statement that it is far better to teach a man to fish than to give him a fish. Or I think it says, if you give a man a fish, he has food for a day. But if you teach a man to fish, he has the skills to be able to eat for life. So I think if many corporate entities are thinking about their corporate social responsibility initiatives in this way, then there can be far-reaching effects and impact. And the beauty about it is that corporates tend to often have a budget to be spearheading some of these initiatives. So it's really about a mindset shift and in terms of the approach that we are taking within this space. So thank you so much to everyone there. As I said, for persons who are tuning in, we are winding down, but if there are any questions that are jumping out at you, anything in particular that you want to ask, please feel free to do so. And so I will move over into probably what will be my very last question of the panelists in terms of any final words on the practice of using communications for good. And I sort of feel like I'm repeating because in so many respects we have spoken about many different aspects, but there are any parting words. Again, as I said, our audience here is made up of students, it is made up of persons who are in the corporate space already doing CSR, and may not be aware of the development focused approach that can be taken. So any parting words for our audience today on what it means to do communications for development, or broadly speaking, to truly use communications for good. Thanks. This is a current variation Candice is pointing out here. It's on screen. Give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, you feed him for life. So that's quite impactful. All right, so are there any parting words that we would want to leave before we wrap this conversation today?
I guess I would just, if this is an area, communications or development or social impact that people are interested in, I really encourage them to explore it. I think it's a field, and I'm not sure, I think it was maybe Ed that mentioned, we need new ideas. We always need new ideas, and that creativity comes from the people who are coming through. And I would encourage you to go for it.
Right. All right, thank you so much for that, Lisa. So I think in many respects, we really would have touched on several of the things that we set out to do. And maybe this is why there's nothing much left to say, because we really have set out, as we mentioned, to kind of really highlight what development communications is, how it can be applied in the corporate space, how companies and organizations can apply this towards more sustainable and more impactful sort of CSR initiatives, or generally just impact-driven initiatives. And we also set out to identify opportunities for students who are currently studying communications or different variations. Importantly, I'm glad that our panelists all started from very different backgrounds, but we're all at the very same space. So I'm hoping that in some respects, this will be a motivation for someone who still is watching to say, oh, but I'm not studying communications or I'm not studying development, etc. But you start off with the passion and the drive and you're committed to change and you can find many different opportunities in terms of how you can be integrated into the space. So, ladies and gentlemen, if there are no further questions, and if there is nothing else to be said by our panelists, I want to take the opportunity to thank you. Is someone saying something?
Well,
Panelists?
I just had a thought, which I wanted to end with. You know, that when you do what you love, you never have to work a day in your life. And for me, this is what develop communications for development is. It's that finding that spark. So I'd encourage persons with that interest to step in and try it because it's really fulfilling work that doesn't feel like work. It's a way of life and it's very, very satisfying. So that's what I'd end with.
Thank you so much for that, Indy. And rightly so, very fulfilling work, way of life. I find as well, I get very passionate about this, and I'm so happy to have been able to do this because it reminds me that I'm with in light company, etc. And so that has proven very useful. So as we wrap, I would just encourage all of the persons who have been tuned in to just ensure that you're following our panelists on their different platforms across social media. This is an Infinity integrated communications initiative. You can find us across all platforms at Infinity IMC. We're on LinkedIn as Infinity Integrated Communications. We have had with us today Ed Fletcher from Shape History. They're based in the UK, and you can find them at Shape History at several platforms at shape_history. We have Engaging Dev, and it's represented by Lisa Ritchie. They're based in Australia, and you can also find them at Engaging Dev. We have with us Meera Tenkwera from Aharon Communications based in India, and you can also find them across different platforms, as well as Indy McKinnon Lafayette from Change Communications based in the Caribbean region, also can be found via Change Communications. So this has been quite a lovely session for me personally. I welcome everyone who has taken the time out of your busy schedules to be here. And I trust that you would have learned even just one thing from the conversation that we have had here today. And of course, if there are organizations that are tuning in and want to sort of level up the way in which you're delivering your initiatives, you know where to find us. So, ladies, gentlemen, and everyone, thank you so much again. And as we close, we will just share a little. And as we close, we will share a video in terms of some of the work that we do.
Helping executives, entrepreneurs, and organizations to communicate with clarity. Culture, improving cultural awareness and cultural competency through training programs. Collaboration, utilizing a mix of culture and communications towards effectiveness in diverse spaces. Get this all at Infinity IMC, your integrated communications champions. Contact us today at 876-824-1274 or visit us at www.infinityimc.com.
All right, so thank you so much again. I see the comments are coming in and much, applause for our panelists. Shane says, very good session. Enjoyed hearing the different perspectives and experiences from different parts of the world as well. Thank you. Lisa says, thanks for a very informative webinar. Lisa says, thank you. So it is safe to say that our audience truly has enjoyed the presentation that we have put together for them today. And so I thank you all. I know we're in very different time zones, and I don't want to keep you much later. And so everyone, thank you again for tuning in. As I mentioned, you know where to connect with us, and do have yourself an awesome evening. From all of us here at C4D and CSR, have yourself a great evening, morning, midday, wherever you are. So signing off and good night.